Welcome to Norse Social Stories, where we explore the hidden tales of Viking life. Today, we dive into the heart of Viking society, a world far beyond the battles and raids. A world where family, community, and social bonds shaped the very foundation of Viking culture. Join us as we uncover the essential role of family in this legendary society. Viking society was built around small, tightly knit communities. Whether in Scandinavia, Iceland, or Greenland, the Vikings were not isolated warriors roaming the lands. They were part of a vibrant culture, focused on survival and prosperity through strong family ties and social structures. In these communities, everyone had a role to play, from farmers, traders, to warriors, all bound together by shared customs and mutual support. The Viking longhouse, central to each village, was where families came together to share food, work, and stories. It was here that social bonds were forged, and where the duties of every family member were carried out with respect. But what role did families play in Viking society? And how did these roles shape the community? So family was everything to the Vikings. It wasn't just about kinship or lineage. It was about survival. A Viking's social status often depended on their family's reputation, their honor, and their success in battle or trade. The family unit extended far beyond just the nuclear family. It included extended relatives, friends, and even allies who were treated as part of the family. A Viking family's reputation could be the difference between prosperity and hardship. Warriors who went to battle often did so to defend not just their own homes, but the very honor of their families. Women were equally important in this structure, often managing the household, finances, and land when their husbands went to war. So what were the specific roles of each family member? Let's start with the Viking men. The men were the warriors, the traders, and the protectors. Their role was to ensure the survival of the family and bring back the spoils of battle or the riches of trade. But despite the heavy responsibility, the bond of Viking men was one of mutual support, brothers in arms, friends for life. Viking women, on the other hand, were much more than the caretakers of the household. They were integral to the family's success, managing everything from land and property to finances. If the men were away on raids, the women took charge of the home and farm. In some cases, they could even represent their family's interests in trade or legal matters. Viking women had a voice in matters that were crucial to the community's well-being, and they had the right to inherit property, divorce, and remarry. Viking society was built on the strength of its families. They weren't just individuals seeking glory. They were part of a complex web of relationships that supported their survival and their legacy. In the next chapter, we'll dive deeper into Viking marriage and how these family units were formed. How did the Vikings choose their partners? And what did a Viking marriage really look like? In this chapter, we delve into one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking culture: marriage. While Hollywood often portrays Viking marriages as wild, passionate affairs, the reality was far more strategic and complex. Let's explore how Viking marriages were more about survival, alliances, and legacy than romance. Viking marriages were almost always arranged. This was not about finding true love or romantic passion. Instead, marriages were carefully negotiated between families, often based on practical considerations like alliances, property, and the promise of offspring to strengthen the family's legacy. A key aspect of Viking society was the importance of family reputation and the need to maintain power within the tribe. Marriages were seen as a way to create strong alliances that would benefit the whole community, whether it was through trade, land, or defense. While the groom and bride often had little say in who they married, They both played a role in the union. The groom was expected to be strong, brave, and capable of defending the family's honor, while the bride was expected to manage the household and bear children to continue the family's line. One of the most important aspects of Viking marriages was the role of the dowry, or bride price, which was negotiated between the families. The bride's family would offer a dowry, often in the form of livestock, land, or valuable goods, while the groom's family would pay a bride price to ensure the marriage's success. Shatsitisein. This arrangement helped establish the financial stability of both families and set the foundation for the future of the couple's offspring. The dowry was not only a symbol of the woman's worth, but also a way to ensure that the family would have a strong economic foundation to support the household and any future children. Choosing a partner wasn't about love. It was about securing the future of the family. The groom's wealth and status played a big role in the arrangement, while the bride was chosen for her ability to manage the household and provide for future generations. Marriages were seen as a business transaction, but with great importance placed on trust and the family's honor. The sagas of the Vikings, those epic tales passed down through generations, reveal a lot about the role of marriage in Viking society. These stories are filled with tales of arranged marriages, alliances, and even the occasional love story that goes beyond the traditional roles of family and power. In the saga of the Volsungs, for example, the marriage of Sigurd and Brynhildr is an iconic tale that touches upon honor, love, and betrayal. Their story isn't just about passion. It's about duty, loyalty, and the deep ties between families. While this might sound more like a dramatic love affair, the underlying message is about the political significance of marriage in Viking culture. Other sagas like the Saga of Njal showcase the political and personal conflicts that arise from arranged marriages. Here, we see how familial disputes, betrayal, and revenge intertwine with the institution of marriage, ultimately showing how deeply interwoven the concept of marriage was with Viking society's survival and honor. Viking marriages were not based on the romantic ideals we know today, but rather on the practical needs of a society that thrived on alliances and community. Through arranged marriages, the Vikings ensured the survival and prosperity of their families, as well as the success of their clans. These unions weren't just about love. They were about legacy, power, and the survival of the Viking way of life. In this chapter, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking culture, the role of women. While often overshadowed by their male counterparts in popular media, Viking women were far from passive figures. In fact, they played crucial roles in maintaining their families, managing resources, and even leading in times of conflict. Viking women were incredibly strong, not just physically, but also in terms of their rights and power. Women had the legal right to own property, inherit land, and even represent their families in court. This was a stark contrast to many other societies of the time, where women's rights were often limited. One of the most important roles women played in Viking society was managing the household. While their husbands were off fighting or trading, women ran the farm, managed the finances, and ensured the survival of the family. In many cases, women were the primary breadwinners, especially in times of war. But it wasn't just about domestic life. Women could divorce their husbands and remarry if the marriage was unworkable. This right gave Viking women a level of autonomy that was nearly unheard of in many other cultures. Women in Viking society were not only confined to the home. Some women took on leadership roles, leading armies and even reigning as queens. In the Viking Age, queens were often seen as powerful rulers who held their kingdoms together, especially in times of crisis. Take the story of Lagertha, for example. She was a famous Viking shield maiden who fought alongside her husband, Ragnar Lothbrok, in battles. The sagas tell us that Lagertha was as fierce as any man, leading warriors into battle and earning the respect of the Viking world. She is an example of the power that women could hold in Viking society, despite the limited recognition they often received in history. Viking women could also be landowners and merchants. The Viking trade network was vast, stretching from Scandinavia to the Middle East, and women played an essential role in facilitating trade. Some women ran successful businesses, trading goods and managing finances, while others held influence in political matters. In addition to their roles in the household and political sphere, Viking women also had significant religious duties. Women were often the ones who performed rituals and ceremonies in honor of the gods. They played central roles in Viking religious practices, including sacrifices and offerings to the Norse gods. The seeresses, or vulvas, were particularly important in Viking culture. These women, who were often highly respected, had the ability to foretell the future and offer guidance. They were seen as intermediaries between the human world and the gods, and their powers were considered essential for the success of Viking society. Many Viking sagas mention women who held religious power, guiding their people in times of hardship and war. These women were seen as spiritual leaders who had a deep connection to the divine. The role of women in Viking society was far more complex than we often imagine. They were not just wives and mothers. They were powerful figures who helped shape Viking culture, whether in the household, in battle, or in the spiritual realm. While many Viking sagas focus on the men, the women's influence cannot be overlooked. In this chapter, we'll take a look at one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking culture: the upbringing of children. Viking children weren't just raised to follow in their parents' footsteps. They were trained to be warriors, leaders, and survivors. Join us as we explore how Viking children grew up, what they learned, and the unique rites of passage they had to undergo to become adults. Viking children were raised with the understanding that their survival depended on their skills, strength, and ability to contribute to the family. Education wasn't about books or schools. Instead, it was about hands-on training and practical skills: hunting, fighting, farming, and even trading. Boys were expected to learn how to fight and become warriors. They were trained in the use of swords, axes, and shields from a young age. They would accompany their fathers on hunting trips and raids, learning how to survive in the harsh Viking world. They were taught to be brave, resourceful, and loyal to their clan. Girls, on the other hand, were trained in domestic duties, such as cooking, weaving, and managing the household. However, they were not entirely excluded from learning the skills of combat. Many Viking women, especially shield maidens, were trained to fight alongside men when necessary, and girls would often learn self-defense. One of the most important aspects of Viking childhood was the rituals of passage. These rites were ceremonies marking a child's transition into adulthood. These rituals weren't just about age. They were about proving that you had the skills and strength to contribute to Viking society. A common rite of passage for Viking boys was the first raid. It was not uncommon for boys to join their fathers on a raid at a young age, typically between 12 and 15. This was their initiation into the world of warfare, and it was a momentous event in their lives. Their success in battle or their role in a raid would determine their status in the community. For Viking girls, the rite of passage was more focused on marriage and motherhood, though some women also had their own roles to play in battle and society. Girls would be taught the duties of managing a household, including how to handle property, maintain livestock, and produce clothing. but they were also shown how to protect themselves and their families when the need arose. Another crucial part of a Viking child's upbringing was spiritual training. Viking society was deeply rooted in pagan beliefs, and children were raised with the knowledge of Norse mythology and the gods. They were taught to honor the gods and to understand their place in the world. Viking children would often participate in religious ceremonies led by the völvas or seeresses, who were believed to possess the ability to communicate with the gods. These ceremonies were essential in teaching children the values of the Viking people, such as bravery, loyalty, and respect for nature. Viking beliefs about death and the afterlife also played a significant role in their training. Children were taught that Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, was a place where brave warriors who died in battle would go. This belief inspired a warrior ethos in young boys, who learned that death was not to be feared, but embraced as part of their journey into the afterlife. By the time a Viking boy reached adulthood, he was expected to be a fully trained warrior. However, the skills learned during childhood were not just for battle, they were for survival. Vikings lived in a world that demanded strength, wit, and resourcefulness. Every child, whether a boy or girl, was raised to contribute to the survival of their community. Once they were considered ready, Viking boys would be given their first sword or axe, a symbol of their status as warriors. This was often followed by a formal ceremony in which the child was recognized as an adult and given the responsibility of contributing to the clan. For girls, becoming an adult meant the responsibility of marriage and family. They would often marry at a young age, but were expected to manage their own households and play an active role in the community. Viking girls weren't just wives and mothers, they were also warriors, traders, and leaders in their own right. Thus, the Viking upbringing was one that prepared children for every aspect of life, from combat and survival to leadership and community building. Viking children weren't just growing up to live, they were growing up to contribute, to fight, and to carry the Viking legacy forward. In this chapter, we turn our attention to the spiritual side of Viking culture. The Vikings weren't just warriors and farmers, they were deeply religious, and their beliefs in gods, the afterlife, and mystical forces shaped every part of their lives. From daily offerings to grand ceremonies, Viking religious practices were an essential part of what it meant to be a Viking. At the heart of Viking religion was a pantheon of gods and goddesses, each governing a different aspect of life. The most famous of these were Odin, the All-Father, Thor, the god of thunder, and Freya, the goddess of love and fertility. These gods represented the qualities that Vikings valued the most: bravery, strength, wisdom, and loyalty. Viking beliefs were rooted in the understanding that life and death were closely intertwined. The Vikings believed in an afterlife, and their idea of the afterlife was closely tied to their warrior ethos. Those who died bravely in battle were said to go to Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where they would feast and fight until the end of the world. However, there was more to Viking spirituality than just battle. The Vikings also believed in spirits, ancestors, and forces of nature. They honored spirits of the land, the trees, and the seas, and understood that the natural world had its own powerful presence. Viking religious practices were deeply connected to the natural world. The Vikings believed that sacrifices were necessary to keep the gods and spirits pleased, ensuring their protection and prosperity. One of the most famous ceremonies was the blot, a sacrificial ritual where Vikings would offer animals, food, and sometimes even humans to the gods to ask for favor. The blot could be held in honor of different gods or to mark important events, such as the harvest or a victory in battle. The ceremony often took place outdoors, near sacred groves, or in specially designed temples, where sacrifices would be made in front of large wooden statues of the gods. One of the most important ceremonies for the Vikings was the wedding ritual, which involved offerings to the gods and ancestors to bless the marriage. The wedding was not just a union between two people, but also a sacred bond between two families and their respective ancestors. In Viking society, there were individuals who were seen as spiritual leaders, or vulvas. These women were believed to have the ability to communicate with the gods and foretell the future. The vulvas were highly respected and played an important role in guiding the community, especially in times of uncertainty. The vulvas would perform rituals and spells, often using runes to gain insight or to influence the outcome of important events, such as battles or harvests. They were seen as powerful figures who could mediate between the gods and the people. In addition to the vulvas, Viking society also had priests who conducted regular ceremonies in the community's temple or in sacred outdoor spaces. These priests were men who were trained in the rituals and knowledge of the gods and were responsible for ensuring that the community stayed in favor with the gods. For the Vikings, death was not something to be feared, but rather something to be embraced. Their belief in the afterlife was strongly tied to their warrior culture. Vikings who died bravely in battle were believed to be chosen by Odin himself to enter Valhalla, a place of eternal feasting and fighting. But not everyone went to Valhalla. Women, children, and those who died of sickness or old age went to Folkvanger, the realm of the goddess Freya, where they could rest in peace. The concept of an afterlife was central to Viking beliefs and helped shape their attitudes toward death, battle, and honor. The Vikings also had strong ties to their ancestors. They believed that the spirits of the dead lived on, watching over the living and helping guide their actions. Ancestors were honored regularly, with offerings and rituals to ensure their favor. Viking spirituality was not simply about following the gods. It was about maintaining harmony with the natural world and ensuring the survival of the community. Through rituals, sacrifices, and a deep respect for their ancestors, the Vikings ensured that their legacy would live on. In this chapter, we'll explore how Viking society, despite its brutal reputation, was built on principles that have shaped modern society in profound ways. While the Vikings are often remembered for their raids and battles, there are crucial aspects of their culture that offer valuable lessons for us today, from their ideas of honor and community to their resourcefulness and respect for the environment. One of the most important lessons we can learn from the Vikings is the emphasis they placed on family and community. In Viking society, family was the cornerstone of survival. Whether it was protecting each other from external threats or sharing resources during harsh winters, the Vikings understood the importance of mutual support. In a world where individualism often takes precedence, the Vikings remind us that communities thrive when people work together. Their society was built around strong, tight-knit groups where every individual had a role to play, from warriors to farmers to traders. Each person's contributions mattered, and the success of the whole community depended on everyone pulling their weight. Another key principle that guided Viking society was honor. The Vikings had a strict code of honor, rooted in loyalty, respect, and fairness. For the Vikings, a person's word was their bond. Promises made were promises kept, and if someone broke their word, they would face severe consequences. The Viking code of honor was also deeply tied to their concept of bravery and courage. Vikings were expected to be fearless in the face of danger and willing to fight for what they believed in. This bravery wasn't about recklessness, but about standing up for the people and values that mattered the most. In modern society, we can draw parallels between Viking honor and the importance of integrity and trust in our personal and professional relationships. The Vikings remind us that our word and our actions should align, that honor is something we earn and protect. Viking society was also characterized by a strong sense of perseverance. Despite living in a harsh environment, facing constant threats from the elements and other peoples, the Vikings adapted and thrived. Their ability to make the best use of available resources and to be innovative in the face of adversity was key to their survival and success. Viking longships were a symbol of this adaptability. These ships were engineered to withstand rough seas and navigate both open water and narrow rivers. The Vikings were master shipbuilders, and their ability to innovate and adapt made them one of the most formidable seafaring cultures in history. Today, in our rapidly changing world, we too need to adapt and innovate. The Vikings show us the importance of being resourceful, staying focused on our goals, and never giving up, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. The Vikings had a deep respect for the natural world. While they were fierce warriors, they understood the balance between humanity and nature. Their survival depended on their ability to live in harmony with the land, sea, and weather. This respect for nature was reflected in their farming, hunting, and fishing practices. The Vikings also believed that their gods were tied to nature, and they would offer sacrifices to the earth, the sea, and the forests to ensure good harvests and safe voyages. They understood that the health of their community was intimately connected to the health of the environment. In modern times, where environmental degradation is one of the greatest challenges we face, the Vikings remind us of the importance of sustainable living and of maintaining a deep connection to the earth and its resources. They understood that humanity's relationship with nature must be one of respect and balance. Perhaps one of the most enduring qualities of Viking society was their resilience. The Vikings faced immense challenges, from extreme weather to raiders to famine, yet they endured and continued to thrive. They were a people who never gave up in the face of adversity, and their resilience was built into their culture and way of life. In today's world, we often face our own challenges, from personal struggles to global issues. The Viking example reminds us that even in the hardest times, we can rise above our circumstances and remain strong. Resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about thriving in the face of hardship. In the next chapter, we'll explore the Viking warrior code in more detail. What made the Viking warriors so feared, and what lessons can we apply from their warrior spirit in our own lives? Stay with us as we continue our journey through Viking culture. So, what have we learned today about Viking society? From their complex family structures to their fierce warriors, the Vikings were a society built on strength, survival, and community. Their marriages weren't about romance, but about survival and legacy. Their women were powerful, owning land, managing homes, and sometimes leading their people. And their children were raised to be warriors, survivors, and leaders. Viking spirituality connected their lives to the natural world, and their rituals, sacrifices, and beliefs in the gods were a central part of what made them who they were. They didn't just fight for themselves, they fought for their families, their communities, and their beliefs. Honor, loyalty, and resilience were at the heart of their culture. And even though much of what we know about the Vikings has been romanticized or mythologized over the years, the truth is that they were an incredibly sophisticated society with a deep understanding of the importance of family, community, and legacy. If you've enjoyed this journey through Viking society, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We've only scratched the surface of Viking culture, and there's so much more to discover together. By subscribing to Norse Social Stories, you'll get access to more deep dives into the Viking world, exploring everything from Viking warriors and family life to their rituals, spirituality, and the epic sagas that shaped their legacy. Be part of our growing community of Viking enthusiasts who are ready to learn, share, and explore. Thank you for watching. We look forward to seeing you in the next chapter, where we will dive into the Viking warrior code and uncover the warrior spirit that defined this great civilization.